Every house, every king, and every battle has its own truth. But there are stories older than crowns, darker than the night, and more dangerous than any blade. They were never written in books. They were whispered to fire, to the trees, and to the dead gods. And today, we dare to uncover one of them. The wind beyond the wall had a voice of its own, low, endless, and filled with the ghosts of ages long gone. It howled through the pines and across the frozen hills, whispering secrets that no man could keep and no fire could silence. Jon Snow rode through that wind. His cloak, thick with fur, was crusted white with frost, and Ghost padded silently beside him, a pale shadow against the snow. The great direwolf's eyes gleamed red in the dim light, always searching, always listening. Behind them came a slow procession of free folk, men and women wrapped in furs, carrying what little they had left of their homes. Children huddled in sleds drawn by shaggy dogs, and the last fires of their torches flickered weakly in the growing cold. They had left Castle Black behind days ago. The wall, vast and glimmering blue beneath the winter sun, now lay far to the south, a monument to a world Jon had once belonged to and no longer did. He thought often of the words that had exiled him here. Your watch is ended. Queen Daenerys was gone. The Iron Throne melted. King's Landing reduced to ash and ruin. The realm he had fought to save had torn itself apart, and Jon, true-born son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, though he wished it were not so, had been sent north once more, to vanish into myth. He did not mind. The north had always been where he belonged. Cold day, even for you, Snow, said Tormund Giantsbane, riding up beside him with a grin half buried in his beard. His laugh came out like the crack of ice. Thought you'd be used to it by now. Jon smirked faintly. I thought so too. They rode in silence a while longer, the crunch of hooves on snow the only sound. Above them, the clouds rolled heavy and dark, promising more storm. When night came, they camped beside a frozen river. Fires sputtered and flared as the free folk set up their tents. Jon sat alone for a time, sharpening Longclaw. The blade still gleamed silver, its direwolf pommel worn smooth by his hand. Ghost lay beside him, head resting on his paws, eyes never still. Tormund joined him, gnawing on a hunk of dried meat. Folks say they've seen shapes in the woods, he muttered, glancing toward the dark tree line. Tall ones, moving faster than any man has a right to. Could be shadows, could be worse. Jon didn't look up from his sword. There's always something worse. Tormund grunted. Aye, but this far north, even shadows got teeth. Later, as the camp quieted and the sky filled with thin streaks of green fire, the aurora that came only in the deepest winter, Jon walked alone to the edge of the forest. The wind sighed through the trees. He thought of Sam, somewhere in Old Town with his books and his newborn son, of Arya, sailing west beyond the maps, of Sansa, queen in the north, and of the dragon queen he had loved and killed. The memory struck like a knife each time it came. Ghost growled low, ears pricking. What is it, boy? Jon whispered. The direwolf's head turned northward, eyes fixed on the darkness. Somewhere beyond the trees, faint and distant, came the echo of horns, 3 blasts, low and mournful. Jon froze. Once that sound had meant White Walkers, but they were gone, wiped from the world with fire and dragonglass. Were they not? The horns came again, closer this time. Not the eerie call of the dead, but the sound of men. Wildling horns, warning of danger. Jon drew Longclaw and ran toward the sound. Ghost bounded beside him, white fur flashing between the trees. The snow deepened, and the air grew colder, sharper, as if the land itself were holding its breath. He broke through the woods into a clearing and saw torches burning. A dozen free folk stood in a half-circle, their faces pale with fear. At their feet lay two bodies, stiff and bloodless, eyes wide open to the stars. No wound could be seen on them, yet frost rimed their lashes, and their skin had turned the color of ash. Jon knelt beside one. The man's breath was gone, his veins dark as ink beneath the skin. Tormund pushed through the crowd, his eyes narrowing. "What in the seven hells happened here?" One of the free folk women stepped forward, trembling. "We found him like this, my lord. No blade, no wound, just cold. Colder than any death I've ever seen." Jon touched the man's neck. The flesh was like glass beneath his fingers. The wind rose again, keening through the trees, and in it Jon thought he heard something, faint and distant, like the cry of a horn made not by man but by the land itself. He stood slowly, his breath clouding before him. "It's starting again." Tormund looked at him sharply. "What's starting again?" Jon sheathed Longclaw and turned toward the far north, where the stars seemed dimmer, the darkness thicker. "The cold," he said, "and what comes with it." Behind them, the aurora flickered out, leaving only the vast, starless dark. The free folk shivered and drew close to their fires, but Jon did not return to camp. He stood long in the snow, listening, and somewhere, deep in the heart of the night, a single horn sounded once more. Not 3 blasts this time, only one. A call not of warning, but of summoning. Ghost lifted his head and howled, and in that cry, Jon Snow heard the beginning of something he did not yet understand, a story that would not end in exile or ruin, but in a crown of frost and fire beyond the wall. The new dawn of the true north had begun. Dawn came thin and gray over the endless snowfields. The free folk moved like ghosts through the mist, breaking camp in silence. A heavy unease hung over them. No one spoke of the 2 dead men, but everyone remembered the look in their eyes, that wide, frozen terror, as if they had seen something that should not be. Jon Snow rode at the head of the column. His breath came out in white clouds. His mind was restless, his heart heavy. Every instinct in him whispered that the cold deaths were no accident of nature. Winter had not loosened its grip. It had changed shape. Tormund rode beside him again, furs bristling, eyes watchful. "You think it's the dead come back?" he asked at last. "No," Jon said, though his tone held no certainty. "The walkers were destroyed. I saw them burn, all of them." Tormund spat into the snow. "Aye, and yet men still freeze without dying first. Don't smell right to me." They traveled north along the river that wound like a vein of black glass through the white wastes. For days they saw nothing but frost and silence. No birds, no beasts, not even the distant shapes of mammoths. The land itself seemed emptied, waiting. On the 4th night, a scout returned. His face was pale, his breath ragged. "There's smoke ahead," he said. "Campfires, but not ours." Jon ordered a halt. He took a handful of men and Ghost, and together they crept through the dark until they reached the ridge overlooking a wide hollow. Below them, flickering through the snow, were fires, at least 2 dozen, and figures moving between them. They were not free folk. Their tents were made of hides Jon did not recognize, and their spears gleamed with metal shaped like claws. Strange symbols had been carved into the snow around their camp, circles crossed by lines, like suns or eyes. At the center stood a tall woman, her cloak black as raven feathers, her hair pale as moonlight. She lifted her arms toward the stars and sang in a language Jon did not know. The sound was low and haunting, half human, half something else. When the fire nearest to her flared suddenly blue, John felt the hairs rise on his neck. Ghost growled softly, eyes fixed on the woman. "She's no wildling," whispered one of the men. John nodded slowly. "No, she's something older." They withdrew before dawn, unseen. Back at camp, Tormund listened to John's account with a grim face. "You sure you didn't dream her?" "I saw her clear as I see you," John said, "and she wasn't alone. A whole tribe, armed, disciplined. They're not like any I've met." Tormund scratched his beard. "Maybe they've been hiding beyond the frost fangs. There's valleys there no one's walked in 1,000 years." "Maybe," John said, but his thoughts were far away. A new power in the north, a people untouched by the wars of men. If they were gathering under a single banner, it meant something, and not peace. That night, as the camp slept, John sat by the fire with Ghost at his side. The flames crackled softly. He could not shake the image of the pale-haired woman. Her voice still lingered in his mind, carrying a strange sorrow. When the wind shifted, he thought he heard her again. A faint echo carried from the far north. "Come and see." He rose before dawn and summoned Tormund. "We ride for the Frostfangs," he said. "If this tribe means to move south, I want to know why." Tormund grumbled, but nodded. "You always did have a taste for trouble, Snow." They took 20 riders and set off across the frozen plains. The cold deepened with each passing mile until even the air seemed brittle. They crossed fields of ice that glittered like glass and valleys filled with the bones of old forests. On the second night, they reached the edge of the Frostfangs, jagged mountains rising like black teeth from the snow. The wind screamed between the peaks, carrying flakes that cut like knives. They made camp in a narrow hollow, their fires small and shielded. John walked alone to the edge of the ridge and looked north. In the distance, beyond a veil of snow, he saw light. Not firelight, but a pale glow that shimmered like moonlight on ice. Ghost whined softly beside him. "I know," John murmured. "I feel it too." When morning came, they rode toward the light. The path wound steeply upward, and soon they were forced to leave their horses behind. They climbed on foot through drifts waist deep until they reached a wide pass opening onto a hidden valley. There, spread out below them, was a settlement, crude huts of ice and stone, fires burning blue within them. The people moved silently, their faces painted white and gray, their eyes shadowed. And at the heart of it all stood the woman John had seen before. She was tall and slender, her cloak lined with silver fur. Around her neck hung a shard of crystal that glowed faintly as she turned. When she looked up toward the ridge, John felt her eyes find his. He froze. The distance between them vanished in that gaze. Then she smiled. The sound of horns echoed through the valley, deep, cold, and strange. The people turned as one, spears lifting. John stepped back, his hand falling to Longclaw's hilt. "We've been seen," Tormund growled. "Aye," John said quietly, "and I think she wanted us to be." By nightfall, they had returned to their own camp, but rest did not come. The air felt heavier, charged with something unseen. John lay awake, watching the embers die. In the silence, he heard footsteps crunch softly in the snow outside his tent. Ghost lifted his head, but did not growl. John reached for Longclaw and stepped outside. A single figure stood there, cloaked in black feathers, pale hair gleaming in the starlight. Her eyes were like ice and fire mingled together. "You crossed the mountains," she said softly. Her voice was smooth, like wind over glass. "You saw my people." John said nothing. "We have watched you," she continued. watched the wall fall quiet, watched the dead burn, watched the world forget what lies beyond. But winter remembers. She stepped closer. The faint light from her crystal bathed her face in silver. You are the one who slew the Dragon Queen, the one who ended fire. Now the North calls for balance. Jon tightened his grip on his sword. Who are you? I am Elyra of the Frostfangs, she said. Daughter of the First Men, keeper of what remains. Her gaze drifted toward the dark sky. The cold you fear is not gone. It only sleeps. And you, Jon Snow, you are the one it dreams of. Before he could speak, she turned and vanished into the snow, leaving no tracks behind. Jon stood motionless, the cold cutting deep. Ghost pressed against his side, growling low. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a horn sounded again, the same low, mournful call as before. Jon knew then that the peace he had sought would not hold. The long night might have ended for the world of men, but beyond the wall, it was stirring once more, and this time it had a name. The next day dawned bleak and windless, a silence heavy enough to unsettle even the bravest among the free folk. Every sound seemed swallowed by the snow, every movement muffled beneath the weight of that strange stillness. The world had grown too quiet, as if the North itself were holding its breath. Jon Snow stood at the edge of the camp, staring north where the mountains rose like jagged white spears against the dull sky. Elyra's words haunted him. You are the one it dreams of. They repeated in his mind with the persistence of a heartbeat, and he could not shake the feeling that the woman of the Frostfangs had spoken more truth than riddle. Tormund approached, stamping frost from his boots. You didn't sleep, he grunted. None of us did. The wind's gone strange. Ghost's been pacing all night like a caged direwolf. Jon gave a small nod. She came to me. Tormund frowned. The woman? Elyra? Jon's voice was low. She found her way into our camp, spoke of the cold, of what remains beyond the wall. She claims the dead are not done with us. The big man spat into the snow. Old stories, Snow. Always someone claiming to be chosen or cursed. We've had enough of that south of the wall, haven't we? Jon looked at him, and there was no jest in his eyes. She wasn't lying. They gathered the free folk to speak. Some wanted to move south again, to find safer hunting grounds near the old wall. Others, fiercer and prouder, swore they would not run from shadows. We've bled too much to bend again, growled a broad-shouldered man called Bruni. If there's a threat, we face it. That's what you taught us, Snow. Jon studied the faces around him, men and women who had followed him through fire and storm, who trusted him not as a lord, but as one of their own. He felt their faith like a weight. We'll not run, Jon said at last, but we'll not charge into death either. We go north to learn who Elyra's people truly are and what they want. Tormund muttered something under his breath about madness in every snowborn plan, but he began to gather supplies all the same. Before they set out, Jon walked to the edge of the river where the bodies of the two frozen men had been buried beneath stones. Ghost lingered beside him, sniffing the air. Old gods watch over us, Jon murmured. The words felt thin against the silence. The march through the mountains was slow and cruel. The Frostfangs were older than memory, and their peaks seemed alive with whispers, the sigh of buried glaciers, the crackle of shifting ice, the faint, mournful echoes of something vast moving deep below. On the third night, as they made camp in the hollow of a frozen gorge, a storm fell upon them. Snow came thick as wool, the wind howling like a beast. Tormund cursed the gods and fought to keep the fires lit. The wind snatched away his words. Jon, wrapped in his cloak, stood watch at the edge of the camp. His face was raw with cold. Somewhere in the white chaos, he thought he saw figures moving, shapes darker than the storm, too swift to be men. When morning came, half their fires were buried, and the valley was silent again. But in the snow beside the camp, they found tracks, long, narrow, and clawed. "Not bear," muttered Tormund, kneeling to touch one. "And not wolf either." Jon said nothing. Ghost prowled the perimeter, hackles raised. That day, they reached a high pass where the wind blew straight from the north. Beyond lay the valley of Elira's people, the same place Jon had seen from afar. Now, it stood empty. The huts of ice had melted into puddles. The blue fires were gone. Only the symbols remained, circles carved into the snow, lines crossing them like eyes closed in sleep. "Gone," said Tormund, scanning the empty plain. "Like ghosts." Jon walked to the center of the valley. There, half buried in frost, he found a shard of crystal like the one Elira had worn. It pulsed faintly, as if it still remembered warmth. When he touched it, his mind flooded with visions, flashes of frozen halls, ancient trees wrapped in ice, and a woman standing beside a vast lake of glass, her eyes bright with tears. Then came a whisper, "Wake the balance." Jon staggered back, breath catching. The shard fell into the snow and went dark. Before he could speak, the ground trembled. At first, it was faint, a low rumble beneath their boots. But it grew quickly, shaking the air and sending avalanches rolling down from the peaks. The free folk shouted in alarm. And then they heard it, a sound like nothing human, a deep, resonant groan that rose from the heart of the mountains. Out of the fog came shapes, immense, lumbering, half hidden by the snow. Their skin gleamed white-blue, their eyes burning faintly with light. Giants, but not like those Jon had known. These were carved by frost itself, their limbs wrapped in ancient armor of ice. Tormund's face drained of color. "Old gods, save us!" The creatures moved without haste, their steps shaking the ground. At their head walked Elira. Her cloak streamed behind her like smoke, and the crystal around her neck burned bright as the sun through storm. Jon stepped forward, Longclaw in hand. "What is this?" he called. "Why bring such things here?" Elira's voice carried easily over the wind. "Not to fight, to awaken. The North remembers its kings, and it will have one again." She stopped before him, the frost giants kneeling in the snow behind her like mountains bowing. "The balance is broken," she said. "You ended fire, Jon Snow, but where fire dies, cold rises. I would see it held in check by one who knows both." Jon shook his head. "I want no crown." Her eyes glimmered with something between sorrow and resolve. "Want is nothing. You were chosen by life and death alike. You carry both in you, the fire of the dragon and the frost of the wolf. You must choose, or the North will devour itself again." The wind rose suddenly, swirling between them, filled with shards of glittering snow. Jon felt something stir within him, not warmth, not cold, but both, warring beneath his skin. His blood burned and froze at once, his breath steaming like smoke. The giants bowed lower, and Elira stepped closer, her voice soft as falling snow. "The dead are not gone. They sleep in the deep ice. Without balance, they will wake. You must stand where no man has stood before. Between life and death, king of neither, but guardian of both." Jon's vision blurred. For a heartbeat, he saw himself standing on the wall again, half buried, half burning, and all the lands before him white and empty. Then it passed. The storm calmed. The giants began to fade like mist, leaving only their footprints behind. Elira's form wavered, her eyes fixed on him. "When the horn sounds thrice, come to the lake," she whispered. "There, the choice will be made." And with that, she vanished, leaving Jon standing alone in the snow. Tormund came to his side, his voice rough. "What in all the hell's just happened?" Jon stared north, where the peaks were already darkening beneath new clouds. "Something's waking," he said quietly. "Something that never should have slept." Ghost pressed against his leg, growling low. In the distance, thunder rolled. Or perhaps something deeper, the north, ancient and patient, was stirring once again. And Jon Snow, who had tried to escape the wars of men, now stood upon the edge of another, one older than kings, older than fire, older than the wall itself. The storm that followed raged for 3 days and 3 nights without pause. The mountains vanished beneath walls of white, and the wind screamed through the passes like a living thing. The free folk huddled in their tents, listening to the fury beyond the canvas, knowing some ancient power had been roused. Jon Snow did not sleep. He sat before a dying fire, Longclaw laid across his knees, the memory of Elira's words burning in his mind. "When the horn sounds thrice, come to the lake." The sound of the storm seemed to echo that promise, distant horns buried within the wind. Tormund crouched beside him, his great shoulders hunched against the cold. "You've gone too quiet, Snow. That never bodes well." Jon's eyes did not leave the flames. "She means for me to go north again, beyond the frost fangs. There's a lake there, frozen," she said. "I think that's where this ends." Tormund snorted. "Ends, he says. You've said that every damn time since the wall fell. But it never ends, does it? Not for you." Jon almost smiled. "No, seems not." Outside, the wind shifted. Ghost lifted his head and whined. Then came the sound, soft at first, then rising. A long, low horn blast that rolled through the night like thunder. Once. The camp stirred. People shouted in confusion. Then a second blast came, deeper, longer, shaking the very snow beneath their feet. Twice. Jon rose, his heart pounding. Ghost bared his teeth, hackles high. Tormund stared into the storm, eyes wide. "Tell me that's our horn," he muttered. But Jon already knew it wasn't. The third blast came, louder than the first two, a sound that seemed to rise from the bones of the earth itself. The air trembled, fires flickered and died. And when the sound faded, there was silence, thick, endless silence. Jon strapped on his sword belt. "Pack the sleds, we're leaving." Tormund cursed but obeyed. The free folk moved quickly, fear lending them strength. Within an hour, they were ready, torches flaring against the storm. Jon mounted his horse, Ghost running ahead through the snow, a ghost among ghosts. They rode north. The path wound between shattered peaks and frozen rivers, all half lost beneath drifting snow. The sky above them was the color of old steel, heavy with cloud. No sun, no stars, only the dim, steady glow that marked the heart of winter. By the second day, the wind eased, but the cold deepened. Frost clung to their lashes. Every breath came as a gasp of pain. The free folk muttered prayers to old gods and stranger spirits. At dusk, they saw the lake. It lay in a wide hollow between the mountains, vast and still, its surface smooth as glass. Beneath the ice, strange lights moved, faint blue glimmers that pulsed like a slow heartbeat. Elira was waiting. She stood alone at the center of the lake, her black feathered cloak spread wide, her crystal burning with cold fire. Jon dismounted and stepped onto the ice. Ghost followed silently, his paws leaving no mark. Behind them, Tormund and the others lingered at the edge, unwilling to set foot on the frozen mirror. "You came," Elira said. Her voice carried easily, though no wind stirred. "The horn calls those bound to the North's will. You could not ignore it." Jon's breath misted in the cold. "Tell me what this is. Tell me why the dead stir again." She regarded him with eyes like twin shards of dawnlight. "Because the balance is breaking. The fire that once held the cold at bay is gone. The dragons are dust, and the wall, your wall, is nothing now but memory. The slumber of the dead grows restless." She raised a hand. Beneath the ice, the blue lights flared brighter. The lake began to hum, a deep vibration that thrummed through Jon's bones. "The cold remembers," she said. "It remembers the pact made when the first men and the children spilled blood beneath the weirwoods. It remembers its kings and its servants, but it also remembers betrayal." Jon felt the ice shift beneath his feet. Faint cracks spidered outward. Beneath the surface, something vast moved. "Enough riddles," he said. "If there's a threat, tell me what I must do." Elira's gaze softened, but there was sadness there. "You must do what no man has done. You must bind it again. Stand as the bridge between warmth and frost. Only you carry both." Jon's hand tightened on Longclaw's hilt. "You mean my blood?" She nodded. "The wolf and the dragon, Stark and Targaryen, ice and fire. That is what you are, Jon Snow, the last balance." The ice beneath them cracked sharply. From the depths below, shapes began to rise, figures dark and pale, eyes glowing faintly blue. Not the walkers of old, but something older still, remnants of what the North had buried. Tormund shouted from the shore, but his voice was distant now, muffled by the roaring wind that sprang from nowhere. Elira stepped closer. "You must choose. Rule the North as its keeper, or let the dead rule it instead." Jon stared into the ice. One of the figures beneath met his gaze, its face strangely familiar. It was himself, a reflection, or perhaps a warning. "Why me?" he whispered. "Because death has already touched you," Elira said softly. "And yet you live. You are its kin, and its enemy both." She lifted her hands. The light from her crystal spread across the lake, painting the ice with fire-bright blue. "Kneel, Jon Snow, not as a lord, not as a bastard, but as the chosen of the North." Jon hesitated. He had bent the knee before, to queens, to kings, to oaths that brought only ruin. But this was different. There were no thrones here, no crowns forged of gold, only the silent gaze of a world waiting to wake. He sheathed Longclaw and knelt. The ice beneath him glowed, the blue light flared upward, wrapping him in fire and frost. Pain seared through him, cold and burning at once. He gasped, but he did not cry out. Elira spoke words he could not understand. The storm around them roared, then broke apart, scattering to the four corners of the sky. The mountains fell silent. When the light faded, Jon stood. His cloak was rimed with frost, his breath steaming like dragon smoke, but the pain was gone. Inside him, there was calm, cold and steady. Elira smiled faintly. "It is done." Jon looked down at the ice. The shapes beneath had vanished. The lake was still again. "What did you do to me?" he asked. "I gave you what the North needed," she said. "A king not of fire, nor of death, but of balance." Then, as the dawn broke weakly over the horizon, she began to fade, her form dissolving like mist. "Guard the realms of men, Jon Snow, for now you guard the world of shadows as well." And she was gone. Tormund and the free folk came rushing across the ice, calling his name. But Jon barely heard them. He stood alone at the center of the lake, the cold wind tugging at his cloak. Ghost sat at his side, red eyes fixed on him with quiet understanding. For the first time in many years, Jon Snow felt neither warmth nor chill, only purpose. He looked northward, where the light touched the endless plain. "The North remembers," he murmured, "and so will I." The wind carried his words away, and with it, the sound of a single horn fading into silence. The dawn after the storm was like none Jon Snow had ever seen. The sky was clear, an endless sheet of pale silver stretching above the frost fangs, and the air hung heavy with a stillness so complete it seemed to smother sound itself. The lake lay frozen once more, smooth and unbroken, as though nothing had stirred beneath it. Yet Jon knew better. Beneath that perfect surface, something ancient had shifted, and so had he. He stood at the edge of the ice while the free folk broke camp behind him. His breath rose in faint clouds. His reflection looked back at him from the frozen lake, his face unchanged, and yet not the same. The cold did not bite as before. It touched him, but did not wound. It was part of him now. Tormund came trudging through the snow, his furs crusted white. "You've been standing here since sunrise," he grumbled. "If you mean to freeze solid, best tell me now so I can build you a cairn." Jon didn't look away from the ice. "Do you feel it, Tormund? The air's changed." The big man squinted. "All I feel is the cold crawling up my—" But he stopped. For in that moment, the wind shifted, carrying a strange sound through the valley. A low hum, like the murmur of distant thunder, but deeper, slower. The ground trembled faintly beneath their boots. Ghost raised his head and growled, the fur along his spine bristling. "What now?" Tormund muttered. Jon's eyes lifted toward the north, where the mountains loomed higher, dark against the sky. The hum came again, pulsing through the air like a heartbeat. "It's coming from beyond the peaks," Jon said quietly. "Then we ride the other way," Tormund replied at once. But Jon shook his head. "No. If we flee from every sound, we'll never find peace. Whatever Elira did, it's woken more than just me." The free folk gathered around as he spoke. Fear flickered in their faces, but so did trust. They had followed him through worse after all. By noon, they began the climb. The path wound steeply upward, the rocks sheathed in glassy ice. The hum grew stronger as they rose, a steady rhythm echoing beneath the snow. By the second day, they reached a narrow pass overlooking a vast, frozen expanse, a plateau blanketed in white. And there, at its center, stood a ruin. It rose from the ice like the bones of some ancient beast, towering stones carved with faces worn by ages, their mouths open in silent screams. Around them lay shards of shattered crystal, faintly glowing with blue light. The place was old, older than men, older than the first men even. Jon dismounted, moving forward slowly. His fingers brushed the nearest stone, tracing the faint carvings. They were not letters, not runes, but symbols, circles and spirals, the same markings Elira's people had carved into the snow. "What is this place?" whispered one of the free folk women. "A grave," Jon murmured, "or a warning." As if in answer, the hum deepened. The ice cracked beneath their feet, and a gust of wind burst from the center of the ruin, flinging snow into the air. Ghost leapt back, snarling. Then a voice came, not from above, but from within the ice itself. It was low and hollow, carrying words that seemed both heard and felt. "The bond is forged, the balance wakes." The free folk cried out and stumbled backward, but Jon stood firm. The ground beneath him glowed faintly blue, tracing the outlines of vast shapes beneath the ice, great hands, chains, and faces half hidden by frost. Tormund seized his arm. "We need to go, Snow. Now!" Jon's gaze stayed fixed on the ice. "No, this is why Elira called me. Whatever sleeps here is stirring, and it knows me." The wind rose, screaming through the ruin. The chains beneath the ice began to strain, their groans echoing through the valley like thunder. For a moment, Jon saw eyes open beneath the surface, two orbs of pale fire staring up at him. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the tremor ceased. The light faded. The wind fell silent once more. Jon dropped to one knee, breath coming hard. His blood felt heavy, sluggish, as though the frost itself had thickened within him. "Jon!" Tormund's voice cut through the stillness. "On your feet, lad." Jon rose slowly, clutching Longclaw for balance. "It's not free," he said. "Not yet. But it's awake." That night they camped in the shelter of the ruins. No one slept easily. Even the fires seemed weaker, burning low and pale. Jon sat apart, staring at the stars. Ghost lay beside him, head resting on his paws, his red eyes fixed northward. When the wind shifted, Jon heard it again, a whisper, faint as breath against glass. King beyond the wall, the bridge between frost and flame. He clenched his fists. "I am no king," he said aloud. But the whisper only laughed, soft and cold. "You are now." By dawn, the free folk were already packing. "We're leaving this cursed place," Tormund declared. "Whatever stirs under the ice, it's none of our business." Jon did not argue. He led them east, away from the ruins, toward the forests that bordered the frozen sea. The journey was slow, the cold biting harder than ever. Yet wherever they went, they found signs of change. Ice that glowed faintly from within, strange tracks crossing their path, shadows that moved against the wind. 2 nights later, they reached the edge of a forest unlike any Jon had seen. The trees were tall and black, their bark smooth as stone, their branches heavy with icicles that tinkled softly in the breeze. The air here was different, heavier, older. They made camp at its edge, too wary to venture deeper. As the others slept, Jon remained awake, watching the forest. Sometime past midnight, the darkness stirred. From between the trees stepped a figure cloaked in white furs. Its face was hidden, but its movements were graceful, deliberate. Jon rose, Longclaw in hand. "Show yourself." The figure stopped a few paces away, then lifted its hood. It was Elira, but not as before. Her eyes, once bright, were dim, her skin pale as the snow around her. The crystal at her throat was cracked, its light guttering weakly. "You've done it," she said, her voice a whisper. "The bond holds, but the thing beneath the ice stirs faster than we thought." Jon frowned. "What is it?" "The first of the cold," she said. "The one your people called the Frost Father. It was bound by blood and fire both, but the dragons are gone now, and only your blood remains to keep it sleeping." She stepped closer, trembling. "If it wakes fully, the north will freeze from within. The free folk, the kingdoms, all will die. You must hold it, Jon Snow. You must become what the wall once was." Jon stared at her, his heart pounding. "You ask me to become a wall?" Elira smiled faintly. "Not stone, not ice, will. The balance must live within you. Only then can the north endure." Before Jon could answer, she stumbled. He caught her as she fell, her body cold as marble. The light in her crystal flared once, then went out. She was gone. Jon knelt beside her, the snow already gathering on her still face. The forest sighed, as though mourning her. He looked up at the dark horizon, where the faintest shimmer of blue light pulsed beneath the mountains. "I'll hold it," he said quietly, "if I must. ghost howled, and the sound carried far into the night, over the forests, over the ruins, over the sleeping ice where the Frost Father dreamed, and the North listened. The days that followed were gray and bitter. The sun climbed weakly each morning, only to fade behind thick clouds, and the light that reached the ground seemed colder than shadow. The free folk grew uneasy. They whispered of the woman who had come to Jon Snow and vanished into death, of the lake that glowed from beneath, of the whispering winds that called his name in the night. Jon spoke little. He rode ahead of the others, Ghost ever at his side, the direwolf's white fur streaked with frost. He felt the land watching him, the mountains and the forests and the wide frozen plains beyond. The North was not merely cold now, it was aware, as if it had opened its eyes after a long sleep and found itself changed. Tormund rode up beside him one morning, his red beard stiff with ice. You don't eat, you don't sleep, and when I speak to you, you don't answer. You turning into one of those ice spawn things, Snow? Jon managed a faint smile. Not yet. Good, 'cause if you do, I'll have to stick a spear through you, and that'd ruin my morning. Jon said nothing more, but in truth, he wondered. Since the lake, he no longer felt the bite of cold. He did not tire as the others did. The fire of life still burned in him, but it burned differently, steadier, quieter, like the heart of a forge that never cools. That night, they made camp near the foothills of a frozen valley. The wind was gentle, but the air felt strange, heavy with something unsaid. Jon stood watch while the free folk slept. Ghost prowled the edges of the camp, his red eyes bright in the gloom. The moon was a pale sliver, casting thin light across the snow, and in that light, Jon saw movement far off, a glimmer of white upon white. He narrowed his eyes. Figures were walking across the valley floor, slow and deliberate, their outlines faint but unmistakable. He reached for Longclaw and whistled softly. Tormund stirred awake, cursing as he pulled himself from his furs. What is it now? Visitors, Jon said. By the time the rest of the camp was awake, the figures had drawn nearer, a dozen or more, cloaked in furs as pale as bone. They moved with the calm grace of people who feared nothing, their torches burning blue instead of orange. When they stopped at the edge of the camp, Jon stepped forward. The leader pulled back his hood, a man with hair as white as the snow, his eyes gray as steel. His face was weathered, marked by age and cold, yet his bearing was proud. You are the one called Snow, the man said. His voice was rough, but not unkind. The woman Elira spoke of you. Jon's breath caught. You knew her? She was one of us, the last of the old order, the ice priests who kept the balance before men came south. When the dragons burned the sky, we went into hiding. Now we have no more time to hide. Jon's hand fell to Longclaw's hilt. Why are you here? The man's gaze lifted toward the north, where faint blue light still flickered along the distant peaks. To warn you. The Frost Father stirs. Elira bound him once with her life, but her strength is gone. The bond weakens with each passing hour. Tormund grunted. And what do you want us to do? Fight him with sticks and guts? We've barely enough food for the week. The man ignored him. Only the one she marked can renew the bond. Jon felt the weight of the man's stare. Me. I. The blood in you carries the fire that tamed dragons and the frost that built the wall. No other may stand against him. Jon said nothing. He had no wish to hear destiny spoken again. Every prophecy, every crown, every oath he'd taken had ended in death and ashes. Yet deep inside, something stirred, a quiet certainty, the same that had driven him through battles and loss. Elira's words returned to him. "You must become what the wall once was." At last he said, "Show me the way." The old man nodded. "We leave at dusk." When evening fell, Jon took only Ghost, Tormund, and a few others who volunteered to follow. The rest of the free folk stayed behind, building their fires high against the cold. The ice priests led the way into the valley, their blue torches casting eerie light across the snow. They marched for hours, the wind whispering around them like breath on glass. Then, through the dark, a faint sound began to rise, a rhythmic pounding, slow and steady, like a heart beating deep within the earth. The valley ended at a vast cliff of black ice. Beneath it yawned a cave, and from that cave came the sound. The priests halted. "The heart of the Frost Father," their leader said. "He sleeps within. If he wakes, no fire south of the wall will ever burn again." Jon stared into the darkness. The air that flowed from the cave was so cold it burned. "What must I do?" The man took a step back. "Go alone." Tormund swore. "Like hells he will." But Jon raised a hand. "It's all right. Stay here." He stepped into the cave. Ghost followed without hesitation. Inside, the air was heavy, almost solid. Frost coated the walls, glowing faintly with veins of blue light. The sound of the heartbeat grew louder, echoing through the stone. It led him deeper, until he reached a vast chamber where the ice opened into a pit of shimmering crystal. At its center lay a shape, a colossal figure, half buried in ice, its features hidden, its chest rising and falling with that slow, terrible rhythm. The Frost Father. Jon approached until the air itself trembled around him. His breath turned to mist, his heartbeat matching the great pulse below. He drew Longclaw and drove the blade into the ice. The shock ran up his arm, searing and freezing at once. "I am no king," he said aloud, his voice echoing through the cavern. "But I will not let you wake." The pit answered with a groan, long and low. Cracks raced across the ice, glowing bright as lightning. Jon fell to his knees, his vision swimming. The cold rushed into him like a wave. Ghost howled, his voice filling the cavern. Then came a whisper, not Elira's this time, but 1,000 voices mingled together, ancient and vast. "You are the wall." Jon gritted his teeth, pressing his palms to the ice. The cracks widened, light flooding upward, searing blue and white. Pain tore through him. He felt himself unraveling, not dying but becoming part of something larger, something endless. The cold filled him completely, and then steadied. The heartbeat slowed. The cracks sealed. The pit dimmed until only a faint light remained. When Jon opened his eyes, he was lying on the cavern floor. Ghost stood beside him, licking his face, whining softly. The heartbeat had faded into silence. He rose unsteadily. The air was still. The Frost Father slept once more. At the mouth of the cave, Tormund waited, his face pale. "You're alive," he said, sounding almost disappointed. "For now," Jon answered. They left the valley before dawn. Behind them, the cave sealed with new ice, smooth as glass. The hum was gone, and the wind no longer carried whispers. But Jon felt it within him, the stillness, the weight. He had done what Elira asked. He had become the wall. And though he walked beside his friends, he knew that part of him would forever stand there in the dark, keeping the North's oldest secret bound in sleep. The balance had been restored. For now. When they returned from the valley, the free folk met them in silence. Jon's face was pale as moonlight, his eyes shadowed, his breath a faint mist that vanished before it touched the air. Something in him had changed, and all who looked upon him felt it. The wind itself seemed to hesitate when it passed him, and the cold bent around him like a living thing. He said little of what had happened beneath the mountain. The truth was too vast for words. He had felt the pulse of the world's oldest frost, the breath of the first winter. It still moved within him, quiet but ceaseless, like a second heartbeat. Tormund tried to draw him out as they marched eastward toward the shelter of the forests. "You've got the look of a man carrying ghosts, Snow. Don't suppose you fancy telling me what's rattling around inside that head of yours?" Jon's answer was simple. "The cold sleeps again." "That's a comfort," Tormund muttered. "If a man can call anything up here comfort." He spat into the snow and trudged on. The free folk were wary of Jon now. They whispered that the old gods had touched him, or worse, that the spirits of the dead Northmen had claimed him for their own. When he passed, their talk ceased, and their eyes followed him like those who watch the edge of a storm, unsure if it will break upon them or pass by. Yet, when trouble came, they turned to him all the same. 3 nights after they left the valley, they found a village. It lay on the edge of the black woods, its huts half buried beneath the snow. No smoke rose from its chimneys. No voices carried through the still air. Jon and a small band went forward to search, their torches throwing long shadows across the drifts. The first body lay by the well, frozen where it had fallen. The man's face was gray, his eyes rimed with frost, and though no wound marked him, fear was written clear upon his features. More bodies followed, men, women, children, all untouched by blade or fire, yet cold beyond reason. Tormund bent beside one of the dead. "You sure this isn't your frost father's work again?" Jon shook his head. "No, this is different." Ghost prowled through the village, his growls low and uneasy. He stopped at the mouth of a hut and barked once, sharp and loud. Jon ducked inside. The air within was bitter and still. On the far wall, carved deep into the timbers, was a symbol he recognized, a circle crossed by 3 jagged lines. He traced it with his fingers. The wood burned cold beneath his touch. Tormund peered over his shoulder. "You know it?" "It's the mark of the ice priests," Jon said. "But why would they come here?" Before Tormund could answer, Ghost gave a warning snarl. Shapes moved at the edge of the village, figures cloaked in white, their torches burning with that same unnatural blue flame. Jon stepped outside, hand on Longclaw's hilt. "Stand down," he called. "We mean no harm." One of the figures came forward, lowering their hood. It was not the old priest who had led them before, but a woman, her face stern and lined by years of cold. "You are Jon Snow," she said, "the one Elira named." "I am," Jon answered. Her gaze drifted to the bodies around them. "These were ours. They sought to awaken what you put to sleep." Jon frowned. "Why?" "Because not all who serve the cold believe it should rest. There are those among us who think winter's dominion must return, that men's fire has grown too strong, their kingdoms too proud. They would see the world cleansed, as it was once." Tormund grunted. "Sounds like madness to me." The woman's eyes hardened. "Madness takes many forms. You have the Frost Father's slumber bound within you, but that binding will draw them to you. They will not stop until the cold is free again." Jon studied her for a long moment. "Then I'll stop them." She inclined her head. "You are the bridge now, the living wall. But know this, every bond weakens in time, even you." With that, she turned and vanished into the night, her followers fading behind her until the village was empty again. Jon stood still for a moment, staring into the darkness. Then he said quietly, "We leave at dawn." They burned the bodies before they went, though the flames struggled against the cold. As the smoke rose, Jon felt the faintest tremor beneath his boots, a heartbeat echoing in the distance, slow and patient. The Frost Father still dreamed, but others had begun to move in the shadows of that dream. For days they traveled south, keeping to the forests where the wind could not find them. The free folk began to speak of heading farther, beyond the Gift and into the true North's borderlands, where old keeps still stood. But Jon said no. "This is our home now," he told them. "We stay." And stay they did, building a camp at the edge of a half-frozen lake surrounded by black pines. It was a hard place, but safer than wandering. They called it Frosthaven. Winter deepened, the days shortened, and the stars grew sharper in the sky. Jon spent his nights walking the perimeter, feeling the pulse of the land beneath his boots. The cold no longer touched him, but he could sense it like a presence, awake, aware, waiting. One night, as the free folk slept, a boy came running through the camp, breathless and wide-eyed. "There's movement in the trees," he gasped. "Shapes, big as men, but not men." Jon was on his feet at once. He called for torches, for weapons. Within moments, Frosthaven was alive with motion, flames flaring, voices shouting. Then the shapes emerged. They were tall and gaunt, their skin the color of old ice, their eyes dimly glowing blue. Not the White Walkers of old, but something lesser, a fragment, perhaps, born from the lingering power that still seeped through the land. They moved with the slow grace of nightmares. Jon drew Longclaw. "Form a line." The free folk rallied around him, spears ready. The first creature lunged, its limbs stiff but deadly. Jon met it with steel, the Valyrian blade cutting through the frozen flesh with a hiss. It fell, its body shattering like glass. But more came. Tormund roared, swinging his axe. Fire met frost. Steel met silence. The night filled with the sound of breaking ice and men's cries. Jon fought like one possessed. The cold moved with him now, shaping his blows, steadying his hand. Each strike sent frost blooming along his blade. When the last creature fell, the snow around them was littered with shards of frozen flesh that steamed faintly before fading to dust. The camp fell silent. The wind sighed through the pines. Tormund leaned on his axe, panting. "If that's what sleeps beyond the wall, I'm thinking I'll start praying more often." Jon wiped Longclaw clean. "They were scouts," he said. "Something's testing the bond." Tormund eyed him warily. "And if it breaks?" Jon looked toward the north, where the stars were swallowed by cloud. "Then I'll hold it again, no matter the cost." That night, the free folk sang no songs. They lit their fires high, and none dared speak of what they had seen. Jon sat alone at the edge of the camp, Ghost beside him, his gaze lost in the dark. The north was restless, its dreams stirring once more. And though he did not yet wear a crown, every soul beyond the wall had begun to whisper his name, as though it were law. Jon Snow, the man who held back winter, the new king beyond the wall. Winter had clenched the north in its iron fist. The days bled into one another, gray and cold, marked only by the creak of ice upon the lake and the endless whisper of wind through the pines. Frosthaven endured, but barely. The free folk hunted what they could, fished through holes in the ice, and prayed to gods who answered only with silence. Jon Snow walked among them, a quiet figure in black and fur, neither lord nor ghost, yet something of both. When he passed, they bowed their heads without meaning to. His eyes were clear as winter stars, and when he looked at a man, that man felt as though the north itself were studying him. Tormund was the only one who spoke to him plainly still. "They're calling you king again," he said one morning as they stood upon the frozen lake. "Not because they want to, mind you, but because they can't think what else to call a man who frightens the cold." Jon said nothing. The wind tugged at his cloak, whispering through the folds. Tormund scowled. "You've gone quieter than a dead man's heart since that night in the valley. It's not healthy. Say something before I throw you in the lake just to see if you float." Jon gave him a weary glance. "I'd rather not test it." The big man laughed, a sound like breaking ice. "That's the spirit." But even Tormund's mirth faded as the weeks wore on. Strange things moved in the woods, shadows that lingered when no man cast them, whispers that carried too far on the wind. Once, a hunter returned to camp pale and trembling, saying he'd seen eyes watching from the trees, blue as the heart of a glacier. He swore they vanished when he drew near, melting into mist. Jon knew what they were: remnants, shards of the old magic, born of the same force that still slumbered beneath the ice. The Frostfather might sleep, but his dreams were long and deep, and they bled into the waking world. Each night, Jon felt the pulse within himself, steady, slow, and cold. The bond that bound him to the ancient power was not silent. It whispered, faint and distant, like waves upon a frozen shore. Hold. Remember. Balance. One night, he dreamed of the wall, not as it had been, towering and bright with moonlight, but as it once was, newly raised, its ice still steaming with magic, its builders chanting words forgotten by time. And in the dream, he saw a woman in black feathers standing upon its crown, her eyes pale and sorrowful. "You must keep the old promise," Elira's voice said, soft as falling snow. "The wall was not meant to end with stone. It lives in you now. But the bond phrase, Jon Snow, the North calls for its king." He woke to the sound of shouting. Outside, torches flared against the dark, men and women running toward the eastern watchfires. Jon seized Longclaw and followed, Ghost racing ahead, white fur glowing in the firelight. At the edge of the camp, a body lay sprawled in the snow. One of the sentries, dead, but not by blade or beast. His face was pale, his veins dark beneath his skin, frost rimming his open eyes. Tormund knelt beside him, grim-faced. "It's happening again." Jon stared down at the corpse. "No, this isn't the Frostfather's doing. This is someone else's hand." He looked to the tree line. The wind was still. Then, out of the shadows, came a figure cloaked in gray. It moved without sound, gliding rather than walking, and when it stopped, its hood fell back to reveal a face neither living nor dead, a man's shape, but carved of ice and sorrow. Tormund cursed under his breath. "Another of your priests?" Jon stepped forward, Longclaw in hand. "Who are you?" The figure spoke, its voice a hollow echo. "I am the warden of the deep frost. Once we guarded the old god's sleep. Now we serve the truth that remains." Jon's grip tightened. "You mean to wake him?" The warden's eyes glowed faintly blue. The world was purer when winter ruled. Fire breeds pride. Men build, conquer, destroy. The cold remembers balance. Jon's voice was steady. "You'll destroy everything." The warden tilted his head. "Everything burns eventually. Better to freeze and be preserved than burn and be lost." Then it lifted its hand, and the air grew heavy. Frost crawled across the ground, racing toward Jon's boots. He swung Longclaw, and the blade met ice with a flash of light. The warden staggered back, a deep crack spreading across its chest. Jon advanced. "You think I fear the cold?" The warden's voice wavered like wind through stone. "You are the cold. but even ice melts when it forgets itself. With a cry, Jon drove Longclaw through the creature's heart. The light within it flared once, then died. Its body fell to shards that steamed and vanished, leaving only silence behind. Tormund spat. I liked it better when enemies bled proper red. Jon sheathed his sword, staring at the place where the warden had fallen. This was no attack, he said quietly. It was a test. There will be more. He turned back to the camp. The free folk watched him in silence, eyes wide with awe and fear. Get everyone ready, Jon said. We move at first light. South toward the rivers, the cold's coming down from the mountains, and I mean to meet it before it reaches us. By dawn, Frosthaven was empty. They moved swiftly, following the frozen river through valleys rimmed with frost. The cold pressed harder each day, until even the trees began to crack and die. Snow fell thick and ceaseless, burying their tracks as they made them. One night, as the storm raged around their camp, Jon stood apart, staring into the dark. Ghost pressed close to his side, uneasy. Through the snow, he saw shapes moving again, tall, spectral, their forms fading in and out of the storm. But this time, they did not attack. They gathered instead, forming a circle in the distance, and in their midst burned a pale blue flame. Jon felt the pulse within him respond, strong and sudden. The bond quivered. Tormund came to stand beside him. What are they doing? Calling him, Jon said softly. Calling the Frost Father. Tormund cursed. Then what in the hells are you waiting for? Jon looked at him, his eyes cold and calm. For them to finish. When the last of the shapes vanished, leaving only silence, Jon turned back to the camp. Tomorrow, he said, we ride north. Tormund stared at him. North? You've lost your bloody mind. Jon's voice was quiet, but iron. If I don't go to him, he'll come to us. I mean to end this before it begins. The next morning, the world was white and still. The storm had passed, leaving the sky clear as glass. The mountains loomed sharp and cold on the horizon. Jon mounted his horse, Ghost trotting beside him. The free folk watched as he rode out. Some called after him, some prayed, but none followed. Only Tormund went with him, grumbling as he tightened his cloak. 7 hells, Snow, he said. One day you'll have to learn to stay dead when you're done saving the world. Jon almost smiled. Not today. And together they vanished into the north, into the endless snow and silence, where the cold waited for its king to return. The north stretched before them like an ocean of white and silence. The world had narrowed to snow and sky, the horizon forever shrouded in mist. Each step of their horses crunched upon a crust of frost that seemed to echo for miles. The wind no longer sang but whispered, soft, steady, and watchful. It carried no scent of life, no breath of warmth, only memory. Jon Snow rode ahead, his black cloak a moving shadow upon the endless plain. Ghost glided beside him, white fur blending with the land, red eyes gleaming like twin embers. Behind them, Tormund rode in grim silence, his face set, his beard rimed with ice. They had left Frosthaven 3 days past, following the faint trail of the blue flame Jon had seen in the storm. It led them north, always north, to the place where the cold was oldest and deepest. The sky above was the color of steel, heavy with unfallen snow. Jon's thoughts moved as slowly as his horse. He felt the pulse within him, the cold that Elira had left bound in his blood, growing heavier, more insistent. It called to something far ahead, something vast and ancient. Tormund broke the quiet at last. We've passed the edge of the map, Snow. Beyond this lies nothing but old stories and death. You sure the thing you're chasing even wants to be found? Jon didn't answer for a long time. It doesn't want to be found, he said finally, but it knows I'm coming. Tormund grunted. Aye, and that's what worries me. That night, they made camp beneath a ridge of black rock jutting from the snow like a broken tooth. The air was so cold it burned the lungs. They lit no fire. The wood they carried would not catch, as though the frost itself drank the heat. They ate in silence, chewing hard bread and frozen meat. Jon sat apart, staring north. In the distance, faint and far, a shimmer of light pulsed upon the horizon, a ghostly blue glow that came and went like a heartbeat. The heart of winter, Jon murmured. Tormund heard him. You've got a talent for naming things I'd rather not see. When dawn came, pale and thin, they rode again. The ground grew uneven, broken by fissures that exhaled faint wisps of mist. The air grew colder still, and the sky dimmed until even the light seemed frozen. By the third day, they reached a valley where the wind did not blow. The snow there was smooth and untouched, yet beneath it, something vast moved, shifting as though the earth itself breathed. At the valley's center rose a single monolith of black ice, taller than any tower Jon had seen. Its surface shimmered faintly, and within it, faint shapes seemed to twist and turn. Faces, perhaps, or memories. The pulse within Jon's chest quickened. He dismounted, his boots sinking into the snow. Ghost followed close, hackles raised. Tormund spat and muttered a prayer to gods he barely believed in. Jon approached the monolith. The air around it was thick, almost solid. The hum of power filled his bones. He reached out, and his fingers brushed the ice. It was not cold. It was alive. Visions flooded his mind. Endless snowfields under black skies, the march of shadowy figures through frost, and at the heart of it all, a great shape sleeping beneath the ice, vast and terrible. He saw the Frost Father, a being not of hatred or mercy but of perfect stillness, a god of silence and time. A voice spoke within him, deep and patient. You are the bridge, the warmth that binds. Why do you come, child of fire and frost? Jon's breath trembled in the air. To keep the world alive. Alive? The voice whispered. The world is weary. Fire burns it too swiftly. Let it rest. Let it sleep. Jon felt the cold creep deeper into his heart, soothing, tempting. The thought of peace was almost sweet. No war, no pain, no endless struggle. Just silence. He saw faces then. Arya, Sansa, Sam, and the thousands who lived beyond the wall, clinging to warmth and life. Their eyes pleaded in the shadows of his mind. He stepped back, gripping Longclaw. The world will rest when it must, not while I draw breath. The ice shuddered. The ground cracked beneath him, splitting wide to reveal a pit of lightless depth. From it rose a wind that was not air, but memory. A howl that carried the voices of all who had ever died in winter. Tormund shouted his name, but the sound was lost in the gale. The light from the monolith burst outward, a blinding blue fire that filled the valley. Shapes formed within it, creatures of frost and bone, their limbs long and their eyes hollow. They poured from the rift, a tide of the Frost Father's will. Jon raised Longclaw. The blade gleamed with pale fire, the light of his blood answering the darkness. Back, he roared. Back to your sleep. He met the first creature's charge with steel and flame. The sword cut through its chest, and the light within it shattered like glass. More came. Jon fought like a storm, each strike sure, each movement calm. The cold did not harm him now. It moved with him, through him, as if it too sought balance. Tormund waded in beside him, axe swinging, cursing and laughing all at once. You and your bloody destiny, he shouted over the roar. If we die here, I'll haunt you forever." But they did not die. The tide faltered. For every creature that fell, the light in the pit dimmed, the wind weakening. Jon stepped forward, planting Long Claw in the ground. The blade blazed brighter, white and blue mingling in its glow. He placed both hands upon the hilt and spoke the words Elira had taught him in his dreams, the old tongue of the north, heavy and slow. The ground answered. The pit closed, inch by inch, the light fading into stillness. The last of the creatures dissolved into mist. When it was done, Jon fell to his knees. The monolith stood silent once more, its glow gone. The air was still. Only the whisper of his breath and Tormund's ragged curses broke the quiet. "You alive?" Tormund asked, limping toward him. Jon nodded weakly. "For now." The big man grinned. "Good. Means I can still punch you for dragging me into this." Jon almost smiled. He looked back at the monolith. A faint crack now marred its surface, running from top to base. The power within it was sealed, but barely. "The Frostfather sleeps again," Jon said, "but his dreams will never end. Someone must always stand watch." Tormund looked around at the lifeless valley. "And who'll do that then?" Jon met his gaze. "I will." The wind stirred at last, cold and gentle. Snow began to fall, light as ash. Jon stood, his cloak billowing, Ghost at his side. The pulse within him had steadied, not gone, but quiet. The north was still. "Go back," Jon said softly. "Tell them to live. Tell them to remember." Tormund stared at him a long moment, then nodded. "Aye, but you'll be a hard man to forget." He turned and rode south, his figure soon lost to the storm. Jon watched him go, then turned north again toward the endless white. The cold embraced him like an old friend. Ghost howled, and the sound rolled across the frozen plains, echoing far and wide. In that vast silence, Jon Snow walked on, alone, yet not alone. The king beyond the wall, keeper of the balance, warden of the world's last winter, and the north bowed before him, eternal and unbroken. The snows fell heavier than before, and the wind took on a voice, low, endless, and knowing. It moved across the white wilderness, like the whisper of time itself, carrying tales of the man who had stood against the Frostfather and lived. Jon Snow no longer counted the days. Time had lost its shape beyond the wall. The sun rose and fell behind curtains of storm, and the stars shone only when the north allowed it. He wandered through silence, Ghost at his side, bound not by duty, but by something deeper, a quiet promise made to a dying world. He had not seen another living soul since Tormund's departure, yet he did not feel alone. The land was awake now. The forests watched him. The ice listened. When he set his hand to the frozen bark of a tree, it seemed to thrum faintly beneath his palm, pulsing with the same slow rhythm that beat in his chest. He had become part of the north, as Elira had said he would. The fire in his veins and the frost in his heart lived in uneasy truce. He was neither wholly man nor myth, yet something between, born of warmth, kept by cold. One morning, when the storm had quieted, he reached a ridge that overlooked a great valley. Below, rivers of mist curled between hills like pale serpents. In the distance, the wall's broken shadow glimmered faintly against the southern horizon. Beyond it lay the realm of men, small and fragile. He stood long upon that ridge, the wind tugging at his hair. The bond that tied him to the Frostfather had grown still, yet never gone. The ancient cold slept deep beneath the ice, but Jon felt its dreams. It dreamed of stillness, of snow unbroken by the tread of men. And within that dream, he sensed a sorrow, not hatred, not malice, but a weary longing for quiet. "I understand," he murmured to the wind, but the world isn't ready for silence. Ghost lifted his head and howled, a deep, haunting cry that rolled across the valley. From somewhere far off, another howl answered. A wildling wolf, perhaps, or something older. Jon smiled faintly. We are not alone after all. He descended into the valley, where the snow grew softer and the air carried the faint scent of pine and smoke. Following the smell, he found a small camp by the frozen river, 4 tents, half buried, and a single fire burning weakly. The men who emerged from the tents were free folk, rough-faced and wary, their beards stiff with frost. They froze when they saw him. 7 hells, one whispered. It's him, the Snow King. Jon stopped a few paces away. I'm no king. The man hesitated. We thought you were dead. Not yet, Jon said, his tone even. The leader, a tall man with a scar across his nose, stepped forward. We've been hearing things. Blue lights in the north, whispers in the wind. Some say the cold walks again. Jon's eyes drifted northward. It does, but not as before. The cold is awake now. It remembers its place, and so must we. The man frowned. And what's our place? To live, Jon said. To build, not hide. Winter will always come, but so will spring. The words sounded strange to his own ears, too much like hope. Yet as he spoke them, he felt the truth settle in his heart, like a steady flame. They shared their fire with him that night. The free folk spoke in low voices, telling of new settlements rising beyond the ruins of the old wall, of hunts that had grown scarce, and of children born beneath the shimmering lights of the sky. Jon listened quietly, saying little. He felt like a ghost among them, half remembered, but never forgotten. When dawn came, the men rose to find him gone. Only his footprints remained, leading north once more. He traveled for days, moving through the heart of the Frostlands. He passed frozen rivers that shone like silver ribbons, forests where the trees groaned softly beneath the snow, and fields of ancient ice that glittered like glass. The world was vast and empty, yet alive with quiet magic. One evening, as the light faded, Jon came upon a circle of stones half buried in snow. He knew the place. It was the same where Elira had first appeared to him. The stones hummed faintly when he approached, and in their center, a shimmer of pale light began to form. She stood there as she had before, her black feathered cloak flowing like smoke. Her eyes were calm, her face kind. Jon Snow, she said, her voice soft as falling snow. The balance holds. Jon bowed his head. Barely. That is all it ever does, she replied. The world turns because of fragile things, because men choose to fight when they might rest, because they hope when they might despair. He studied her, unsure whether she was ghost or memory. Why show yourself again? Because the circle is complete, she said. You are what the North needed. You kept the frost from waking. But your work is not to end it. It is to guide it. Jon frowned. Guide it? The North is alive now. Its strength will return, and with it, its people. The free folk will follow you, though they may not understand why. You must lead them, Jon Snow, not to war, but to peace. He looked down at his hands, scarred and pale. I'm no ruler. I've led enough men to their deaths. Elira smiled faintly. Then you are exactly what they need. A king who does not want to rule. A guardian who seeks no glory. She reached out, her fingers brushing his cheek. Her touch was neither warm nor cold. It was balance itself. The world remembers you, Jon Snow. But the North will remember you differently. Not as the bastard of Winterfell, nor the slayer of queens, but as the bridge that held the world together when it might have broken. Her form began to fade, the wind passing through her. Farewell, my king. the light vanished, and Jon was alone again among the stones. He stood there long after the night had fallen, the stars wheeling slow above him. The aurora danced across the sky, green and gold and white. For the first time in many years, he felt peace. When dawn came, he began to walk south, not to leave the north behind, but to return to his people. He found Frosthaven rebuilt. Smoke curled from chimneys. Laughter echoed faintly between the huts. The free folk gathered as he entered, silent and awed. Tormund was there, older, his beard streaked with gray. "Told you he wasn't dead," the big man said with a grin. "You're too stubborn for that." Jon clasped his arm. "Good to see you, old friend." Tormund looked him over. "You look colder." Jon smiled. "I am." That night, they feasted beneath the stars. The fires burned high, the meat sizzling, the air alive with song. Jon sat apart for a while, watching the flames, listening to the laughter. When at last he stood, the camp fell quiet. "My watch is not ended," he said, voice carrying across the firelight. "We are the watchers now, not for kings or crowns, but for each other. The wall may be gone, but we are its stones." The crowd murmured, some nodding, some whispering. Tormund raised his cup. "To Jon Snow," he roared, "the king beyond the wall." Cheers rose, echoing into the frozen night. Jon lifted his cup, but did not drink. He looked to the north, where the stars burned cold and bright. The Frost Father slept, and the world endured. For now, that was enough. Ghost pressed against his leg, and Jon laid a hand on the direwolf's head. "Come on, boy," he said quietly. "Let's see what the dawn brings." And so he walked from the firelight into the snow, where the first light of morning touched the land, silent, eternal, and alive. The snows began to ease when the first pale hint of spring crept into the north. It was not warmth. There was little of that beyond the wall, but a gentling, a breath of stillness that did not bite as fiercely. The winds softened, the nights grew shorter, and the trees of the black woods shed their heavy cloaks of frost. In Frosthaven, life had taken root. The free folk built their homes from timber and stone, ringed their fields with crude fences, and learned again the rhythm of living, not merely surviving. Children played in the snow's shallows. Hunters brought back game from the deep woods. The world was waking, timid and unsure, like an animal sniffing its way out of a long sleep. Jon Snow watched it all from the ridge above the camp, Ghost at his side. The direwolf's fur had grown thick, his eyes brighter, older. They both carried the silence of the north within them. "You watch them like a lord watches his small folk," said Tormund, climbing up the hill behind him, breath steaming from his beard. "If you're going to play at being king, you could at least build yourself a chair." Jon smiled faintly. "I've no taste for thrones." I remember. That didn't stop you from finding trouble every time you walked near one." Jon's smile faded as he looked north, where the mountains still shone like glass in the distance. "The Frost Father sleeps, but his dreams linger. I can feel them." Tormund spat into the snow. "Then dream quieter. We've earned our rest." Rest. The word felt strange to Jon's ears. He had not known it in years, not in the black nights of the wall, not in the wars for the living, not in the shadows of kings. Yet here, among the people who had once been his foes, he found a kind of peace. The free folk did not kneel, nor did they ask him to. They followed him because he walked where they walked and fought where they fought. But peace in the north was never meant to last. One morning, scouts returned from the northern forest bearing grim news. Something was moving there, something vast. Trees torn down, snow blackened, tracks too wide for any beast. The hunters had vanished without trace. Jon listened in silence, his jaw tightening. "How far?" "2 days' ride," one answered. He turned to Tormund. "Gather 20 men. We ride at dawn." They rode hard, the cold slicing through them like knives. The deeper they went, the stranger the world became. The snow glowed faintly blue beneath the starlight, and the air shimmered with thin, ghostly lights that moved like fireflies. The land was remembering itself, remembering the old power that had once ruled here. By the second night, they reached the place the scouts had spoken of. The trees stood blackened, their trunks split open as if by great heat, though no fire had touched them. The ground was scarred with long, curling gouges that froze into glassy trenches. Ghost prowled ahead, ears flat, teeth bared. The air hummed faintly. Then they heard it, a low rumble from beneath the earth, like the growl of something waking. The horses shied and snorted. Tormund gripped his axe. "Tell me that's not what I think it is." Jon's voice was quiet. "It's him, or part of him." A crack tore through the ground ahead, and from it burst a plume of icy mist. Within it, a shape began to rise, tall and shifting, its edges lost to the storm. It was no body, no beast, but a shadow given form, woven of frost and wind. The Frost Father's dream had taken shape. Jon dismounted, drawing Longclaw. "Go back," he told the others. "This isn't your fight." Tormund snorted. "Aye, well, too bad. You'll need someone to tell the tale." The shadow moved, slow and deliberate. Its eyes opened, 2 pits of pale fire that burned without warmth. Its voice came as a whisper of 1,000 storms. "You bound me, child of fire, yet still you wander. Why?" Jon steadied his breath. "Because the living still need me." "The living are noise," the voice murmured. "They burn and fade. I would grant them peace." "Peace through death is no peace," Jon said. The shadow stirred, and the temperature plunged. Frost spread over Jon's boots, racing up his legs. He raised Longclaw, its blade gleaming faintly with silver blue light. The cold within him, the bond he carried, flared, answering the darkness. He stepped forward, and the world shuddered. Each strike of his sword sent ripples through the air, each movement echoed by the pulse in his chest. The frost shadow loomed, its vast arms sweeping down, but Jon met the blows with ice and flame both. The wind screamed, the snow swirled, and the earth cracked beneath their struggle. The free folk could not see him clearly through the storm. Only flashes of light and shadow, blue and white entwined. Ghost leapt and tore at the thing's edges, his howl carrying through the chaos. Then Jon drove Longclaw deep into the heart of the storm. Light erupted, blinding and pure. When the wind died, the valley was silent. The shadow was gone. Only Jon stood there, half kneeling, Longclaw buried in the ice. His breath came in slow clouds. Tormund approached, cautiously. "You alive?" Jon nodded. "It's done." But he knew it was not. That night they camped beneath the broken trees. The men slept fitfully, haunted by dreams of endless winter. Jon lay awake, staring at the sky. The aurora shimmered faintly above, its colors soft as breath. In the stillness, he heard Elira's voice again, not as before, but faint and fading, carried on the wind. "The bond weakens. The Frost Father stirs again. You cannot hold him alone." Jon closed his eyes. "Then who will? The North must remember what it was. Teach them. Make them ready." The voice faded, leaving only silence. He rose before dawn and walked to the river's edge. Ghost followed, his breath steaming. The water beneath the ice moved slow and dark. Jon knelt, dipping his hand into the snow. "She's right," he whispered. "If I fall, someone must stand after me." When they returned to Frosthaven, he gathered the free folk beneath the weirwood at the center of the camp. Its red leaves shivered in the cold, its pale bark glowing faintly in the morning light. "The North is not free of danger," Jon told them. "The frost still sleeps beneath us, and it dreams of the end of all things. But it is not our enemy. It is what we are. The wall kept us apart from it for 1,000 years. Now it is gone, and we must learn to live with what lies beyond." The crowd listened, silent, uncertain. "You must be its keepers," he continued. "When I am gone, you must stand where I stood. You must remember the balance." Tormund's voice rose above the rest. "And what of you, Snow? You talk like a man about to vanish." Jon met his gaze. "The bond weakens. If it breaks, all we've built will fall. I'll not let that happen." Tormund swore softly. "Always you with the martyr's heart?" Jon smiled, faint and sad. "Someone has to have one." The days that followed were filled with preparation. Jon taught what he could. The old words, the sigils, the ways to sense the shift in the wind. He led them to the sacred places of the North, where the trees whispered in the old tongue. And when the first new snow of spring began to fall, he stood once more at the edge of the forest, Ghost beside him. Tormund came to see him off. "You'll not come back, will you?" Jon looked north. "If the balance holds, there'll be no need." The big man sighed. "Then I'll see you in the next life, Snow." Jon clasped his arm. "Keep them safe." Then he turned and walked into the storm. The snow closed around him, white and endless. Some say he vanished into legend. Others whisper he walks still, watching over the land he swore to guard. But in the coldest nights, when the wind howls across the wall's ruins and the stars burn blue, the free folk tell their children a different tale, that the king beyond the wall walks the snows still, his direwolf at his side, keeping the balance between life and death, and that so long as Jon Snow stands watch, winter will never claim the world again. Seasons drifted like slow dreams beyond the wall, and the world of men forgot much of what had been. South of the ruins, kings rose and fell. Their wars bled into dust. Their banners rotted beneath rain. The North remained apart, untamed and quiet, ruled by no lord save the wind and the snow. Yet in its silence, a tale endured. The tale of the man who had vanished into the storm and never returned. They said the snows themselves carried his name. They said wolves howled when his shadow passed beneath the moon. They said no army could cross the lands he guarded without the breath freezing in their lungs. It had been many years since Jon Snow had left Frosthaven. No man now living remembered his face clearly, but his deeds had settled into legend. The free folk called him the White Wolf, the Balance Keeper, the king without a throne. They left offerings for him when the storms grew cruel, a blade in the snow, a handful of blood, a whispered promise of courage. And still, the North endured. Yet the North was not unchanging. Strange things began once more to stir. Hunters spoke of cracks opening in the far ice, deep and dark, breathing cold mist into the night. Lights danced above the frost fangs, blue, not green. Children dreamed of a voice calling from beneath the ground, soft and sorrowful. Tormund Giantsbane, older now, gray streaking his red beard, sat by Frosthaven's great fire, listening to these tales. The flames crackled, reflecting in his tired eyes. "He said the Frostfather would sleep," he muttered to no one in particular. "Said he'd keep him bound, but what happens when the Watcher grows weary?" A young woman stirred beside him, one of the new chieftains, tall and fierce-eyed. Her name was Nala. She had never known Jon Snow, but she had heard the songs. "Then we wake another," she said simply. "The North always finds its keeper." Tormund gave a weary chuckle. "Aye, maybe so, but there was only one snow." That night, as the fire burned low, a storm began to build. It came from the north, swift and fierce, turning the world white before dawn. The free folk shuttered their huts, the children clutching at their mothers' hands, and through that blizzard, a figure walked. At first, they thought it a ghost, a shadow moving between snowdrifts, pale as the storm itself. But when the wind broke for a heartbeat, they saw the glimmer of steel upon his back, and at his side, the faint shape of a great white wolf. He came to Frosthaven without word or herald. The snow parted before him like mist before the sea. When he reached the fire, Tormund rose, disbelief warring with joy and fear. "7 hells," he breathed. "It's you." Jon Snow stood at the edge of the firelight. His cloak was crusted with frost, his hair streaked white as bone. His face was leaner, harder, but his eyes still held the same quiet depth, gray and endless. "Tormund," he said softly. His voice was low, roughened by years of wind and silence. "It's been a long watch." The camp fell silent. Even the storm seemed to hesitate. Tormund took a step closer, then another, until they stood face to face. "You were gone near 20 years. We thought you dead." "I was," Jon said simply. The words sent a chill through those who heard them. Tormund frowned. "What do you mean?" Jon looked into the fire. The flames flickered, painting shadows across his scarred hands. "The Frost Father stirred again. I went north to quiet him, and the bond broke. I became part of it, part of the cold. I slept beneath the ice for a time." Nala, standing nearby, swallowed hard. "Then why wake now?" Jon's gaze rose to the storm beyond the camp. "Because something new is coming." He stepped closer to the fire, and for the first time they saw the faint blue shimmer in his skin, like veins of ice beneath the flesh. The Frost Father's dreams are not his own anymore. There's another presence in them, something born of fire, not cold. It reaches northward, hungering. Tormund shook his head. "Fire and cold both? Gods, haven't we had enough of that war?" Jon's eyes softened. "The world always seeks balance, but it is never still for long." He turned to Nala. "Your people have grown strong. You've built something here. That's why I came back, to warn you. The fire comes again. When it meets the cold, the world will tremble." The young chieftain met his gaze squarely. "Then we'll fight." Jon almost smiled. "I thought you might say that." That night, while the camp whispered of his return, Jon stood alone beyond the fire's reach. Ghost waited beside him, silent and steady. "You've aged better than I have," Jon murmured, running a hand through the direwolf's fur. The beast rumbled softly in reply. Jon looked north, where the storm raged brightest. He could feel it now, a heat in the far distance, faint but growing. It was not the fire of men, nor of dragons. It was something older, something he could not yet name. He closed his eyes and felt the pull of both powers, frost and flame, tugging at the thin thread of his soul. He had walked between them for so long that he was no longer sure where one ended and the other began. "Balance," Elira had said. "You are the bridge." He had thought that meant peace, but perhaps it meant standing forever in the storm. When morning came, he gathered the free folk at the weirwood. Its red leaves shivered, shedding a soft snow of color upon the ground. "A shadow moves in the south," Jon told them. "It burns as it moves, and the earth cracks behind it. If it reaches us, it will wake the Frost Father again. We must stop it before the two meet." Nala raised her spear. Then we march south." Jon shook his head. "No, the cold cannot march into fire. I will go alone." The murmurs rose, protests quick and fierce, but Jon lifted his hand and they fell silent. "The North must remain strong. If I fail, you must hold what we have built. Promise me." Reluctantly, they nodded. Tormund stepped forward, gripping Jon's shoulder. "Don't die again," he said gruffly. Jon met his eyes. "I'll try." And then he was gone, slipping into the storm once more. Days passed, and the blizzard carried his name southward again. Snow, snow, snow. The free folk watched the horizon each night, waiting for his return, and though none saw him, some swore they heard a wolf's howl rolling through the wind. Far away, in the broken valleys of the north, a lonely traveler might see a faint light moving against the darkness, neither blue nor red, but something between. And wherever that light passed, the cold grew quiet, and the fire dimmed, as if the world itself paused to remember. Jon Snow walked still, a man bound between two eternities, keeping the balance no other could. The North was his kingdom, silence his crown, and all the endless snows his throne. And in the hush that followed each storm, when the wind held its breath and the stars shone pale above the frost, the world whispered the name of its last watchman, the king beyond the wall. The world beyond the wall changed once more. Seasons turned without measure, the years flowing like snowmelt into rivers unseen. The free folk thrived where once they had only endured. Frosthaven had become a city of timber and stone, ringed by palisades carved from ancient pine. Smoke rose from its chimneys, laughter from its halls. Hunters ranged the woods and herders tended their shaggy beasts across the plains. The wild north was gentler now, or so it seemed. But beneath the snow, something restless stirred. The dreams of the Frost Father had grown deep again. Jon Snow felt it first. He wandered the empty lands north of Frosthaven, following no road and seeking no end. His cloak was tattered, his hair streaked with silver, his face marked by time and wind. Yet his eyes still burned clear, the same gray steel that had once stared down kings and death alike. Ghost walked at his side, old and silent, but his stride remained proud. They were creatures of the same world now, bound by loyalty older than memory. The bond within Jon still pulsed faintly, that mingling of fire and ice that Elira had woven into his blood. It had quieted for many years, but of late it began to throb again, uneven, uncertain, like a drumbeat beneath distant ice. Something was shifting, something vast and ancient. One twilight, as the last light bled away over the mountains, Jon climbed a ridge and looked out across the white expanse. There he saw it, a faint red glow upon the horizon, flickering through the mist like the breath of a dying forge. Fire. He stood long upon that ridge, the wind cutting through him, the pulse in his chest quickening. He remembered what Elira had warned. The fire comes again. Jon turned south at dawn. It took days to reach Frosthaven, but when he did, he found it braced against the same unnatural storm that followed him from the north. The sky was low and heavy, and snow whirled like ash. He entered the great hall, where Nala sat with her captains, and the fire cast tall, uneasy shadows. "You've returned," she said. "The storm is worse than any before. The wind burns. The snow falls red in the mornings." Jon nodded. "The balance is breaking. There's fire moving beneath the earth." Murmurs filled the hall. The elders shifted uneasily. Tormund's son, a broad man with his father's fierce eyes, slammed his fist on the table. "Then we fight it. We've held the cold. We can hold the heat." Jon shook his head. "This fire isn't of men or dragons. It's older, wilder. It feeds on the frost sleep. If it wakes fully, the Frost Father will rise again, and this time, not to sleep. Nala studied him, her gaze sharp. Then what must we do? Jon looked toward the fire pit at the hall's center, its flames flickering low. We go to the heart, where fire and ice meet. There's a rift in the frost fangs, a place where the old magic bleeds into the world. If I can reach it, I can bind the balance once more. You can't do it alone, she said. Jon smiled faintly. I was never truly alone. At his side, Ghost gave a soft growl. That night, the aurora burned red instead of green. The people watched from their huts, fear etched in their faces, and whispered prayers to gods long silent. By dawn, Jon rode out with a small company, Nala, Tormund's son, and a handful of the free folk who would not let their king walk into danger without them. They crossed the plains, their breath steaming in the frozen air, their furs heavy with frost. The wind screamed through the passes, and strange lights shimmered in the distance. By the fifth night, they reached the rift. It yawned at the base of a frozen cliff, a wound of black stone veined with red fire. Steam rose from its depths, carrying a smell like burnt metal and ice. Jon dismounted. No farther, he told them. This is my path. Nala dismounted as well. You're not leaving us behind. Jon met her gaze. If I fail, someone must lead them. You. She opened her mouth to protest, but he laid a hand on her shoulder. You're stronger than you know. You'll guide them through what comes after. She bowed her head. Then go, King beyond the wall. Do what no one else can. Jon smiled once, brief, almost sad, then turned toward the rift. Ghost padded beside him, silent as snow. Together, they entered the darkness. The air grew hot as they descended, the frost melting from the walls. The sound of rushing water filled the cavern. Though no river flowed, the light grew redder, brighter, until it painted the stone like blood. At the heart of the cavern, he found it, a vast pool of molten light where fire and frost met and hissed. Above it, the ice of the ceiling shimmered like glass, and within that ice, faint shapes stirred. Jon knelt beside the pool, Longclaw across his knees. The pulse in his chest thundered now, echoing the rhythm of the flames. He could feel both forces pulling at him, cold whispering peace, fire roaring for release. You are their bridge, Elira's voice came again, faint as breath. Not forever, only until the world learns to balance itself. Jon closed his eyes. Then let it learn now. He drove Longclaw into the pool. Light exploded outward, filling the cavern with fire and frost alike. Heat and cold warred, clashed and merged. The sound was thunder, the sight blinding. Ghost howled beside him, a sound that cut through the storm. Jon felt himself unraveling, his strength pouring out like water into the earth. The frost within him met the fire and fused, each tempering the other. He was no longer cold or warm, no longer man or myth. He was the meeting of the two, the stillness at the heart of the storm. When the light faded, the pool was gone. Only a circle of ice remained, smooth and unbroken. Ghost stood beside it, silent, eyes glowing faintly with red and gold. The air was quiet. The rift had sealed. Above, the storm broke. The aurora returned to green and white. In Frosthaven, the people awoke to calm skies and soft snow. The air smelled clean again, and the ice of the rivers gleamed with new light. Nala stood upon the walls, watching the horizon. In the far distance, she saw a wolf moving across the snow, alone but not lonely. Years passed. The story spread among the free folk and the Northmen beyond the ruins of the wall. They said Jon Snow had become one with the land itself. that his spirit walked the frost fields to keep the fire and the cold in balance. When storms rose, they whispered his name to calm them. When fire threatened, they burned a single white candle in his honor. And though no man ever saw him again, those who wandered far into the wilds sometimes returned with tales of a tall figure in black walking the tundra, his dire wolf beside him, his eyes pale as morning ice. In time, the children of Frosthaven carved his likeness in stone, not as a king on a throne, but as a man standing among the snows, cloak billowing, sword in hand, wolf at his side. Beneath the carving were words simple and true. He held the balance. And so the legend of Jon Snow endured, not of a bastard, nor of a king, nor of a savior, but of a watcher who stood between two eternities and kept the world whole. Beyond the wall, the wind still whispers his name. And when the night grows stillest, when the fires burn low and the cold presses close, the North remembers, for its king still walks in the silence, guarding the dawn forever.